America in mourning tonight after the death of former President George H.W. Bush.
While most Americans only knew the nation's 41st president from afar, St. Louis sculptor Don Wiegand's experience with George H.W. Bush was truly hands-on.
I had to set up this thing so it would work in one shot. Very nervous.
Don Wiegand makes his living as a sculptor, but he does a lot of work for free through the Wiegand Foundation, which creates works of art to honor people making the world a better place. And one of the ways he does that is through life castings, three-dimensional plaster copies of a person's hands made using a mold. And after Don had done one for President Bush's St. Louis cousin, Bert Walker, and his wife, Walker suggested to the former president and First Lady that they have Don do one of them too. And in August of 2013, he did, bringing his casting tools to their home in Kennebunkport.
It was an amazing experience to go into their home, and they were sitting in very overstuffed easy chairs. Very casually, the president was reading a letter and a book. He just basically said, "Don, here's my hand, do what you want with it."
Don suggested Mr. and Mrs. Bush hold each other's hands and then stick their arms into a bucket of molding compound and hold the pose for 10 minutes.
Yeah, it was kind of frightening. And I certainly didn't want to look at the surroundings because it would make me more nervous. I was just thinking of them as two people, and I'm just doing a job. When they first put them in, I always tell them, "I'll go have dinner and I'll come back in 2 days and I'll pull your hands out," but I didn't do that. I didn't catch them on that one.
This was not the first time Don Wiegand had met President Bush. In 1989, his first year in office, the family of Ernest Hemingway, together with the state of Idaho, presented Mr. Bush with a bust of Hemingway sculpted by Don Wiegand. And that was not the first time Don Wiegand was in the Oval Office, because a few years earlier, he presented a bust of Mark Twain to President Reagan. Wiegand says Reagan was nice, but more formal than Bush.
It's almost scary walking into that room. You could feel the power coming out of the floor. President Bush was very gracious, very down to earth. It's almost like I thought he'd want to sit down in the Oval Office and have a beer.
They did not end up sharing a drink, but Mr. Bush gave Don something even better.
He gave us a present, and I opened up the case, and it was the presidential Bush cufflinks, which was very cool. I've worn them a number of times, only for special occasions.
One of those special occasions was a USO ceremony in 2002. The group was awarding a special edition of the USO's Spirit of Hope Medal, which Don designed through the Wiegand Foundation. That year's recipient was George H.W. Bush. The artist and the president were together again.
And I raised my arm up and said, "You gave me these cufflinks in the Oval Office in '89. It's such an honor to wear them." And he was so cool because he said, "Don, I liked him. I saved a set." He raised his arm up and dropped the sleeve.
11 years later, they met for a third time when Don came to Kennebunkport to do the life casting. He finished touching up the piece in 2 weeks, but getting back on the former president's schedule for the unveiling took 2 years. In August 2015, they met for the fourth and final time, when Don returned to Kennebunkport with Bert and Carol Walker to present the life casting to the Bushes.
The most amazing thing about the life casting shows that Mrs. Bush is holding up the president. It wasn't planned. It's a pure moment of just reality. I pointed out to both of them how she was holding him up, and he really liked that.
Barbara Bush suggested the piece go to the Presidential Library in College Station, Texas, where it remains today as part of the collection.
It was a blessed experience. It was really amazing.
Don Wiegand has had many rewarding experiences through his art, but his relationship with George H.W. Bush adds new meaning to the phrase first-hand experience.
It's almost like you're going for it and you pray that something's going to work. And it did, and it was actually magical.